Welcome back to the module on gathering evidence of student learning. Recall that the four main ideas of this module are think of evidence broadly, gather evidence aligned to learning goals and success criteria, plan and strategically position evidence gathering opportunities, and capture a range of student responses. This video is focused on the third idea, plan and strategically position evidence gathering opportunities. Gathering evidence at multiple points throughout a lesson allows teachers to make sure that teaching and learning are in sync. Lessons that proceed without regular evidence gathering can be compared to pre-recorded video. Push play at the start of the lesson, push stop at the end of the lesson, and hope that the students learn something in between. To be responsive to real-time student learning, teachers must pre-plan strategic opportunities for evidence gathering. At what points during this lesson am I going to need evidence to keep teaching and learning in sync? Here are some questions to consider. When will evidence be needed? Will it be needed before or at the start of the lesson to determine how best to begin and frame the lesson content? Will it be needed a few moments into the lesson before building on introductory content? Will evidence be needed partway through the lesson to decide among different instructional routes to the learning goal? At a key point during the lesson to know if students are ready to move on, and/or at the end of the lesson to help plan the next lesson or other next steps. It can be helpful to have success criteria articulated for each of these stages in the lesson for you and your students to gauge the progress of learning. Of course, teachers need to gather and act on evidence of learning from all students. However, it may be that teachers do not need to gather evidence from all students during every lesson. During some lessons, teachers may want to target particular groups or individuals, perhaps to see how they have used feedback, or because they appear to be struggling to grasp a new concept, and the teacher feels that it's important to keep a close watch on how their learning is evolving. Now we'll talk about leveraging spontaneous opportunities. Opportunities to see how student learning is taking shape often arrive spontaneously during the lesson, and good teachers know how to capitalize on the evidence afforded by these moments. However, the role of evidence in the formative assessment process is too critical to leave to chance. Teachers place evidence gathering opportunities strategically throughout the lesson to make sure that they have the most relevant and up-to-date information about student learning. Next, we'll talk about strategically planning, not scripting. There is an important distinction between planning and scripting evidence gathering opportunities. The first facilitates the formative assessment process, but the second stifles it. When teachers design or select a strategy to elicit evidence of student learning, they are not trying to micromanage either exactly how the teaching and learning will unfold or unduly limit interactions among students and the teacher. Yes, it is important to think in a detailed way about how you expect learning to develop and what evidence you will need, but it is counterproductive to try to predict the minutiae of what eventually will occur in the moment in the classroom. Next, we'll go over the idea of planning to anticipate. For example, when teachers intend to gather evidence through student questioning, it is important for them to have thought about which questions they will ask and at what points during the lesson. Teachers prepare questions that purposefully build into the flow of the lesson, are well-worded, and aligned to the learning goals and success criteria. They anticipate possible student responses and prepare appropriate pedagogical moves based on these responses. Notice that this is very different from inflexibly scripting or micromanaging every classroom interaction. Teachers are not limiting student responses or stifling spontaneity. Rather, they are making sure they have all the resources necessary to best respond to the inevitable unpredictability of learning. Next, we'll pause and reflect. At what points in a lesson do you typically gather evidence of student learning? How do you decide when? Think of a learning goal from a recent lesson and two key questions. At what point would the evidence from these questions be most useful? Thank you. You have completed the third section in the Gathering Evidence of Student Learning module. This video draws on training modules created by CRESST for the Colorado Department of Education. We thank the Colorado Department of Education for enabling us to share this work. We are also grateful to the following individuals for their contributions to these modules: Brenda Padletti Sullivan, David Sullivan, Anjanette Williston, and Angela Landrum.